Our guest on the podcast today is Tys Story. Ty is the founder and managing partner of Friends at Work, an agency that manages John Legend, Charlie Puth, Lindsay Sterling, and is really trying to do things differently. We hope that you enjoy listening to her story and how she got to where she is today. Enjoy the podcast. So Ty, thank you again for being here. We're very excited to talk to you. We're bummed we missed you in LA, but now we get you. So we're thrilled to hear your story, and we know our audience will be as well. We hear a lot about big announcements and especially for someone like you, big announcements about your clients. But what we'd really like to talk about here is your story. That's what In Her Words is. And so, really, you obviously in our research, we've learned your story and some, but we want to hear it in your own words, and we want our audience to hear how it came about that you are running your agency, how you started out, what you thought you were going to do, in high school and college, and just kind of the road that got you here.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's not often that the behind the scenes people get to share their narrative. And I used to be pretty shy to do it. And over the last maybe 5 or so years, I've started to push myself out more to tell my story, because I think it's important that younger people can see options and opportunities. And so it's been a real pleasure to kind of go over my own story and to acknowledge it. The way it started was I grew up in Philadelphia as an artist, a little kid going to Quaker school, which if you've heard of the Friends schools or the Quaker schools on the East, most of them are on the East Coast, they really promote the sort of social and emotional well-being of a child. And I think it was that education, looking back, that kind of gave me a sense of thinking out of the box, knowing that I could add not just value to something, but also purpose. We were graded on concern for the community. We very much engaged with the community. And so my whole education from 1st through 12th grade just required that I get into spaces and help other people and engage, and not just kind of stay wrapped up in like, how are my math and history scores going? So with that foundation, I had a big balance from my immigrant father, who came to America through Ellis Island on a boat when he was young and really came here with nothing with my grandparents. They were fleeing war. They lived in a displaced persons camp, and then they came to America. And so my dad's perspective was more like, in order to make it in this great country, you need to know finance, you need to know economics, you need to know how to smoke a cigar and drink some whiskey. He was just like very much wanted me to be this alpha female Wall Street executive, because for him, it was the sort of becoming a stockbroker and joining the Navy that helped him kind of really succeed in America eventually. And so I balanced out my kind of Quaker singer-songwriter artist side with econ undergrad, at Penn, and then going back to Wharton Business School to get my MBA. These were all places where I felt like a fish out of water, but I was smart and I knew I could compete in these spaces, but they were oftentimes, there's very few women. I even remember being in AP math class in my Quaker school and being like one of 2 girls in the classroom. So I was kind of always in these spaces that were pretty male dominated, competing with my older brother, competing with the men in business school. At the time that I went to Wharton, it was in 2001 to 2003. I think 30% of the class were women then. So it wasn't that we weren't there. It's that we were definitely a minority. And honestly, there were guys in business school who said, I would never want to date a woman who's here at Wharton, because I would want my partner to be home and cooking and taking care of the children. There was like, I try to remind people that we're not that, with my mom's generation.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I know. And you
right?
think about it sometimes, you're like, wait, how could that be? But then you remember, like in 1971, I think it was like the first year that women could actually get a credit card without their husband's approval.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and I remember like my mom's era, and my mom definitely, she was a nurse, but you know, at a certain point in her life, she really studied feminism and became very awake to sort of the inequities. And she started reading Gloria Steinem and, you know, just sharing a lot of that knowledge to me. So I really felt like as a young woman, I had a sense of like, we're moving the ball forward. And there are a lot of places that still aren't for us, but we're going to break those glass ceilings. We're going to get in there, you know? And I think, you know, I went into business school, came out a consultant, just like most people who go that route, including my friend in undergrad, John Stevens, who went to Penn. We were both in a jazz and blues a cappella group. I ran the group as the president. He was the music director. And when he graduated, he went to BCG Consulting. And it wasn't until later that he decided to change his name to John Legend and try to make it as a musician. So that's kind of how like I ended up knowing someone who was starting to get into the music business. And I also knew a lot of people in Philadelphia who were in that neo soul scene. So I kind of had a sense of like, there's this music business thing, but I was really on this other sort of consulting business track and was hoping I could get back to entertainment, hoping I could get into all of the creative sides of things. But once you start wearing a suit to work every day and getting those big jobs after you have a Wharton MBA, you tend to become that person who works for the CFO of a big entertainment company, and you're very, very far removed from the creative process. Yeah. And that's kind of where I found myself in my late 20s, making good money, feeling like I had accomplished what my father had hoped, you know, working for big companies. I worked for a guy named Kevin Mayer here in Los Angeles at LEK Consulting. And Kevin was kind of the head guy in the entertainment department. And he later went on to become Bob Iger's right hand at Disney. Mm-hmm. And then after I left LEK, I worked for Sarah Hardin, who was at a company called Ascent Media. Sarah is now the CEO of Hello Sunshine, which is Reese Witherspoon's company. So I had some really good training with some smart executives in media and entertainment who kind of taught me the broader macro landscape and the business pieces of content distribution. And that was very helpful. I didn't know at the time that I was doing all of that I'd end up starting my own company, working with my old friend, John Stevens, who's now John Legend in 2005. But luckily luckily or unluckily, I'm not sure. I was on a plane coming back from Seattle to Los Angeles the day after Christmas on Alaska Airlines in 2005. And we're up at about 27,000 feet. And I'm looking out the window over this snow-capped Mount Rainier. And a giant pop happens in the plane, and wind starts rushing through the plane. Masks come down.
Oh my God.
I'm thinking, this is it. This is how it goes. This is how it ends. And it was a big kind of moment of not so much sadness, but like regret and anger that I hadn't done more of what I wanted to do. So I kind of made this bargain with God or my dead grandmother, whatever I was praying to at the time. I was thinking, if we land, I promise I won't waste another day doing things that don't make me happy, that I'm not passionate about. I'll take better risks. I'll live more to the fullest. I'll have kids. I'll do all the things I said I would do one day. I was just like, no, I can't, this can't be it because I haven't done anything yet. And we had an emergency landing. There were ambulances and fire trucks all along the side of the runway. Luckily, everybody was okay. They later found out that it was because they had fired a lot of labor union workers with baggage handlers and hired some people who didn't know what they're doing. And one guy hit the plane with his baggage cart and didn't say anything about it. And then later on, the fuselage was so sensitive that it just, once it was pressurized, it popped open a huge hole in the plane. Oh, but long story short, I'm in my late 20s, it's 2005. And I went in and quit my big fluffy job for the CFO of a big public company. I went in and quit. And then I didn't know what to do, and I was a bit depressed, but I knew I couldn't stay in that corporate world anymore. I knew I couldn't be that far removed from my entrepreneurship, from my creativity, from my sense of power and agency of like, when do I get to wake up and where do I want to go? And, when you work for those big companies, like, especially as a woman who maybe wants to have children, you have a lot of those questions of like, well, am I going to get any time off when I have a baby? Will I have a paid maternity leave? Will I be able to keep up this pace and compete in this professional environment and still be a mother? Like, there's all these trade-offs, right? And I wanted a little more control over my life. And, I quit, and then I called my friend John Legend, who had just put out his first album, Get Lifted. And he was like, come to New York, let's brainstorm, let's whiteboard, let's get into our consultant selves and think about what could we do if my career really goes as far as I hope it can, and where do we take it? And then it was that year that we started John Legend Ventures. I moved to New York. We had a tiny little office in the meatpacking district before that whole neighborhood shifted. And we, within a year, he was kind of like, why don't you take over management and go team up with somebody? So that's a long-winded way of saying how I got into management. And that was 2005. So it's almost 20 years ago.
Wow.
Which is crazy. Now I'm the 47-year-old woman who's in this business instead of the 29 and 30-year-old who was told, by most of the men dominating it, that you kind of can't really be a manager and a mom because you'll never see your kids. And, and I was always kept out of rooms, and pretty much everywhere I went with John in those early days, even though I was technically manager, I never called myself that. I was really submissive to the men who I had teamed up with. I let them do the meetings. I was efficient. I didn't know this music business space. I knew I was really good at what I was doing with John, but I was very, very careful. And it took me years to gain the sort of sense of like, wait, I should have more of what we're building here. Like, I shouldn't be just a paid salary person who's doing all the work, and then that guy gets the cover of Fast Company and gets all the credit and gets all the back end. Like, it took me because there's nobody that, I didn't see anybody like me doing it. And I was also like, I have a Wharton MBA. I have a great Ivy League education. I know music. I'm a musician. I have a really good taste. I'm great friends with John. Why am I making less than what I made in those bigger companies? And what have I really done? But it was years of investment of time and learning and watching carefully and seeing, and then eventually getting the courage to say, okay, I'm leaving this place because it's not really giving me what I need. And frankly, I don't think it was really giving my clients what they needed. So now I'm going to go team up with this guy. And then I teamed up with that guy. I got a little bit more of what I needed. But it was useful because I saw a lot of the places of, running things in ways that I didn't want to do it. And, there gets to a point where you can only like kind of complain too much without realizing like, maybe this is harder than you think. You should go try it yourself. So it was in 2015 that I left another company that I was kind of a partner in, so to speak, and then launched Friends at Work. And now that's 8 years of building my own company and having a whole team approach and a kind of matriarchal workspace and management with a giant infrastructure. We have at any time between 30 and 50 employees within the two pieces of my company. One is called Friends at Work, which is more traditional management. And then the other piece of it is called The Work. And The Work is more of a storytelling agency and has more sort of like retainer work with bigger brands, but they assist in a lot of the creative work for the artists. And with all that, I've been talking so much, I should make sure you guys are all still there.
We are still here.
Okay.
Mesmerized by this story.
Like, I just realized I'm like, I could be talking to myself and they'd be like, hi, where are you? We lost you. Okay.
That's a great story. going back to where all of those places where you were the first or the only, how did you push through that, being, with a smaller group of women in in the MBA program? And then do you think that the way that your dad supported you and what you saw as an example in your mother, was that helpful to be like, I don't care if I'm the only. I'm having very Ruth Bader Ginsburg moments here listening to your story of her having to be like, sorry guys, I'm smart and I'm gonna push through. And how was that for you? What kept you going in that?
It's a great question. I'm not sure. I mean, I think I was driven by some kind of psychology of like needing to be seen and get like succeed and be heard. And I think in some ways it was like a deep, bubbling frustration that kind of kept me going in a lot of ways. And then I did have a partner who was very, very helpful in supporting me and growing it. So I think having a partner for a couple decades that was like, you got this, like, and kind of could pay more of like the steady bills so I could take some risks. That was really helpful. I often find that women who are, breaking ceilings and are big entrepreneurs, not always, but sometimes they have somebody else that's like supporting them in that. So I give a lot of credit actually to the men who've been in my life who've had more access and more success financially. And then at a certain point, like it all took off for me. And then it was like, whoa, this worked. We've got a huge successful company now and some of the world's greatest clients. And I don't just manage John Legend and Charlie Puth and all of these artists, we really partner with them. And so it's not like a client services business as much as it is sort of like, there's this big global brand of John Legend that's a $50 to $100 million annual revenue business. Mm-hmm. Who's managing that? I'm a partner in his film and TV production company. I'm a partner in his skincare Loved One that we just launched and built from scratch in-house, and with our partners, over with Ari and those guys. So it's been a process. And how did I keep it going? I just had this ambition that I just wanted to get there. And I knew I was smart and could do it. And honestly, if it wasn't for John Legend, who had so much confidence and belief in himself, I think a lot of musicians, they think they need the big, well-known established guy to be popular and to make it. And John wasn't really that way. Like he didn't think he needed the established names. Like he was like, no, we're doing good. We're doing this well. And you're my person, you're my manager. And so it was his kind of belief in me that helped me stay the distance. And then I think at a certain point, there were lots of musicians coming my way and artists saying like, hey, I really want a woman manager. And you're the only name that comes up. And then the purpose became, okay, well, that's not good. If you get there, you've got to raise up a whole bunch of people with you. Yeah. And so at Friends at Work, we're majority women. We really take a look at who we are and make sure that it's a diverse, inclusive workspace. A lot of the women that I work with, including some of the biggest, most established managers at Friends at Work, are mothers. And we have little ones that we take care of, and we normalize taking care. We normalize a workspace that is responsible in that way, and not, mainly out of just like this is the way workspaces should be. But what gives us an advantage is that there's so many great managers out there, and they want to team up with an infrastructure as big as ours, and they could go team up with one of our competitors, but when they come and sit down with us and we talk about our maternity leave policies, and we talk about, how we load balance, and we talk about each of us trying to live our best lives, that we're not just like subjugating our entire life and existence for someone else. That's just no way to live. And then they're like, oh, I think I should come join you. I think Friends at Work is the right home for me. And it often is. And we find people that are like-minded, and we've created this amazing company that most of the people have been with me from the very beginning and even before that. So there's not a lot of high turnover. It's not, it's not what I came from. I'm always striving to make it just a more and better place for people to thrive, and not just our artists. Like I want every artist we work with to thrive, and I want all of us to thrive. And that's been the purpose that has kind of kept me in it for this long. And I do think we've built something special. I was talking to a manager today she was with another company, building this pretty successful young pop star. And she was doing all the work and managing this artist. And I think it was over COVID, she had young children, and she needed to move in with her parents so that they could help watch the kids. And she had to like move out of state and go somewhere. And the head guy in the company that she worked for was like, that's not okay with me. You didn't tell me about that. Like, it just became this huge breaking point for her, where she was like, what am I doing? Like, what? Why am I at a place that doesn't understand? Like, I'm a mother. I need support. I'm a parent. Like, how do we do this and make this work? And I didn't know that until my head of HR, Candace, who's a mother and incredible executive, and she left Viacom to come join us. She told me she sat down with this manager and started to go over our policies. And this manager who wants to come join us was like, wait, the first thing out of your mouth is about how you take care of these elements of people's lives, and maternity and paternity leave and bereavement, like all of these sort of policies that most places don't really care about in our business. Management is like, it's a weird Wild West kind of thing. It's often, nobody goes to school for like, how do you become a music manager? So there's not a lot of standards. It's often, how good is your relationship with your artist? And then how successful is your artist? We're trying to come up with more shared best practices. We try to not work as like silos. So like there's this one manager and artist over there and this other one, and we really try to share best practices, learn from each other. And it works better in that way. So if you have a bigger company with more clients, you can really like, okay, that gig won't work for John, but it'll work for a Rouge Aftab, or it's, this isn't the right fit for the national, but we can talk to Raphael Sadiq and Tony about that. Or there's a young pop star, she needs to go out on tour. Let's have her open for one of our other bigger pop stars. And that becomes useful. It's very hard, I think, in this day and age to be a lone manager on your own with an act and maybe like one assistant, because it takes a team to really manage a big, talented artist. It takes a digital team, marketing, branding expertise, touring expertise, so many pieces of the puzzle. And any one of those management companies, like, with a guy at the top, and it's usually named after him, they're relying upon a staff of 30 to 100 people to make it look like their artist is successful. And at the end of the day, it should be more inclusive, and the value should be shared, because there's a lot of money in this if you get it right. And so then it's like, okay, is it one guy who buys a $60 million home from all of that? Or is it a whole staff of 50 to 60 people and everybody's doing really well? And just, I don't know if it's, again, my Quaker roots, but I really think more of it should be equally distributed, and that it takes a team. Because my daughter's homesick today, picking up my kids later. I really think that we should be normalizing more of that shared load balance and working together to do this well.
When you say that the music business is more of a Wild West, do you feel that there's an unconscious bias to it? Or do you feel, like, what do you think that pain point is, that the whole industry hasn't kind of elevated itself or set a whole new level of standard? Or is it just not thought about?
Conscious and unconscious, I mean, you look at the roots of music and the music business and like the heyday. You're talking about the tagline being sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Like the managers who I teamed up with, they told me stories of when they were young and at Geffen Records of guys with lines on the table and, sex workers in that space all the time, exploiting women. You couldn't really get in a recording room. There's not a single writer who's a woman that I know who hasn't been sexually harassed in the studio workplace. There's not a single woman. There's very few women producers. I mean, Stacy Smith from USC Annenberg, who comes out with these annual reports and does all of this data analysis of like, how are women doing in entertainment, not just in film and TV, but in music. Yeah. And we just had the Grammys, and there was a event right before the Grammys. Spotify held the event. It was about how women are doing in music. And Stacy Smith was there with Willow Bay, the dean of the Annenberg School at USC. And Stacy got up there and gave us the sad news, which is, it's not getting that much better. Only 15% of songwriters of the bigger songs in the top 200 are women. And only a small percentage of women are music producers. And the way she said it, I recorded it. I'll try to get it right. But she said something like, that means, you know what that means? That means like one of the greatest art forms of our time. That's also like one of the things that is, the most culturally relevant, that, what we're listening to, what the lyrics are, what the norms are, what the emotions, what we're talking about. It's mostly done by men.
Yeah.
Like, why after all this time? And I remember just a few years ago when that first report came out by Stacy, and the head of the Grammys at the time, Neil Portnow, said, well, and I know him, and I know he didn't mean to say it this way, but his immediate response was, women just need to step up. And sorry, my cat is making
very cute.
So I think, there's unconscious bias. There's conscious bias.
Yeah.
There's people in power who want it to be the fun playground that it used to be. Then there's the Harvey Weinsteins of our business who, haven't really been exposed. There's the people at the top who have been in power forever. I mean, I was just going through this thing, which annoyed the hell out of me, and I shouldn't have looked at it, but it's like the same powerful people that have always been there, many of them for decades and decades. And, there's gatekeepers, there's secrets that have been covered up. It's a creative business, and a lot of people who get to the top don't have any kind of formal executive training. I mean, there are people who are running record labels who didn't graduate high school. And I'm not saying that you have to have a formal education to be good at this, but they're not talking about like management practices of team members or, responsible sort of sense of business. I do think it's cleaned up a bit for sure. But it's still not where it should be by any means. And I think if you have more women in power who aren't just women who've risen up in these big, almost sort of conglomerate type, monopolistic companies, if you've been there for the last 30 years and now you're the CEO, chances are you're not really being that innovative. You're not really telling the truth. And you're not really exposing the bad norms of our business. So I'm one of the rare people that's kind of come from the outside, never worked at a label, never worked at a publishing company, who built something on my own and can speak a little bit more freely about what's broken and what's wrong.
When you're looking for talent that you want to represent and so forth and manage, do you look for, unfound talent that are focused on, to make sure that the women are coming up? And when you're looking at that, like, what are the qualifications, or how are you finding these folks?
Well, one of the things Stacy recommended that night was that all musicians who are really big and write big songs pick like 10 women writers to work with, and work with women producers. And I've definitely, we are constantly, we have an A&R department who's run by a woman in my company named Jessica Breslow. We're always recommending. I texted John the video of Stacy Smith and he's like, great, let's do it. But we've done that. We make sure that in film, TV, and music studios, we're working with a broad set of women, people of color. We're always thinking about kind of making sure that access and leveling the playing field is part of our goal. And in my own company hiring practices, in compensation, in all sorts of ways, when we're signing acts. And we don't sign that many. It's not like we're not red light with hundreds and hundreds of artists. We're radically sort of selective about who we work with, because management is such an all-in, nonstop commitment. Doesn't matter whether you're making 50 million a year or 50,000, it's the same amount of work. But I tend to gravitate towards artists who are just extraordinary. And most of the time, they're aligned with our sense of purpose. We won't work with artists who don't want to leverage their platform to do good in the world. And I'm old enough now and kind of powerful enough that I can say to a young 30-something-year-old pop star, you've got to step up and show up for this, and do the performance at Global Citizen, but not just that. Like, you need to speak out more. We need to set up your foundation. Like, I've done that with John. We built a whole movement. So once you kind of do it that way, you really hold somebody's feet to the fire for that. And it's really rewarding for them, because it gives them a deeper sense of purpose than just like, oh my God, did I get another pop song on the radio? So their life matters more.
When I was reading about friends that work in the philanthropic side of it, do you get pushback from other managers or other people that are not a pushback, but just not understanding, like, why, like just what you said, why you're asking that of these young people, and letting them see, there's more out there, there's a bigger opportunity, the bigger responsibility. Is that embraced? Are people copying it, or are they like, oh God, what are they doing over there?
It's changed over time. I think when I first started the company and I was there were a lot of corridors, bigger management companies that wanted to come and maybe buy me or have me team up with them. My activism was like everywhere around me, on my sleeve. I was constantly talking about it. And there was a lot of funny looks, like, that's not a good business practice. You don't mix those things. You should do that on your own time. I mean, we even had those debates in Wharton Business School, like what is ultimately, is your job about shareholder value and bottom line profit? Or can you start to think about a company having a broader sense of purpose? But, I'm not a big public company. I'm my own private company. So we can decide what our rules and our norms are. But back in the day, people thought that was like bad business practices and really dumb. And now I think each one of those people who wasn't sure about that has hired their own in-house head of social impact. So it's luckily, I think it's heading in a better direction. And I think COVID definitely accelerated that. I think we realized, like, look, we're all in this together. And this sort of sense of individualism and, bottom line profit is the only metric for success. I think that's shifted a lot since I went to business school. So over the last 20 years, I think young people have really started to question whether that form of extreme capitalism is working, right? So it's nice to kind of put some of that into practice in music. where, I think Nina Simone said that it's the artist's responsibility to reflect the times, and John Legend has been carrying that baton forward, and sort of he'll speak up and out, even when it's not popular. And I think he's really influenced by the Marvin Gayes and the Nina Simones, and seeing what Bruce Springsteen has even done. So hopefully you continue that norm amongst artists. I think it's hard for like true artists to sort of sit back and be like, okay, I don't care. I'm not going to get political.
Right.
And it's nice when you see an artist step up and do that, as scary as it can be. I just watched the Taylor Swift documentary where she takes this huge leap against her father's recommendation, against all the old guys that are sitting there across from her from the table. I think it was like Scott Borchetta and a few other people. And they were like, don't do it. You're going to lose half your audience. It's a terrible idea. Why would you do this? And everybody was kind of thinking about the Dixie Chicks when they lost their career over saying one thing about George Bush. And Taylor was adamant. She's like, I'm still going to do it. I'm going to speak up. I'm going to get political. And she did, and she's fine. It's a different landscape.
Well, it's interesting, I think when you look back on like the 60s and 70s, music was a activist. It's like when you listen to the Beatles, the Stones, and you listen to all of those different, it was through their lyrics. And music has changed, right? Like that was an expression for the times and for the activism. And you think of everything that happened in the 70s and the 60s. And now it's, a lot more voices and individual voices coming up and stepping up on a different field. Activism has changed in that sense that it's not a global revolution. It's different types of revolutions, and they can be very individual or they can be very widespread. And I think that's something that you're seeing where music has been a safe place for that,
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really proud of the younger people who have spoken up and out. And, when Roe, the Supreme Court said, okay, no more Roe versus Wade. Like Charlie Puth hit me up and was like, I want to say something. This isn't right. Women should have complete control over what they do with their bodies. Even if an artist isn't particularly well read and doesn't know something, like the fact that they're asking questions and they're seeing all of their peers post something about it and do something about it, like you almost seem strange if you're not engaging. And I never thought I'd see the day that like Kendrick Lamar is talking about trauma and, violence and having Eckhart Tolle on his album. Like you listen to Kendrick's latest album, and Eckhart Tolle is like, his voice is on there talking about,
right.
That just blew my mind. I was like, the way you can affect culture and affect people and raise the consciousness through music. I mean, obviously you can do that really well through film and TV as well. So that's sort of our aim every day, is like, how do you raise the consciousness? How do you get people to care and to give a shit? And the best way to get someone to care is to crack open their heart and make them feel something. So if a song makes you feel something, or a movie or a TV show, and sometimes it doesn't all have to be serious. Like, John Legend will talk about a lot of Marvin Gaye's main theme was about romance and sex and sexual healing. But but embedded amongst that was sort of what's going on, and inner city living. And so I think you try to find like a good balance between like the joy and the pleasure and the fun and the dance, but also the like, okay, how do I speak up about something and wake people up a bit? And we never listen to the audiences who say, shut up and sing, which,
right.
Which is silly. It's like, how can you shut up and sing at the same time? So John always says, but yeah, we just keep on affecting good, positive energy frequencies and change. And you have to, that starts with your own practices, right? So if you're an artist out there espousing certain things, but then you're living a life where you're stuck in a cycle of addiction, or you're abusing people in ways that you're not even conscious of, like, artists really need to be healthy themselves in order to share a lot of that. And I do think there was kind of like this cult of this mystique of like the rock and roll artist, or an artist who suffers and is like in so much pain. And that's the other thing is like, I'm sorry, I'm a mom. I've been through so much therapy. I do yoga and Kundalini, and I want all of us to be able to be creative and healthy at the same time.
Yeah.
And you know how many people in the music business, just like young people, just end up, ODing, or young and old. It's not the safest of professions.
Yeah.
It's really not. It doesn't always lead to a great, long, sustainable, healthy life. And so if we can play a part in it as management, as your team, like helping you get off the road and take a break, helping you have a family and stay home, helping you succeed, and also think financially about like how to make that go the distance so you don't overspend right up front, which happens with a lot of sports figures too, who get successful. There's got to be better people around the artist for the artist to succeed and thrive and be sustainable in the long term. And that was not the case. Back in the day, think about it. It was like just exploitation. And honestly, when you have a music business, it's based off of like the money-making ability of a particular artist. And you've got the same guys running that money-making ability, and it's a big global enterprise, and there's public companies, and it's all been consolidated. Yeah, I mean, obviously they want their artists to live, but for the most part, they're cycling through people. This is a product. That toothpaste brand didn't work. Okay, give me a different toothpaste brand. And there's just a road of like, there's just such a long story of exploitation, suffering. So many women artists I know were like popular and then discarded, when you hear about what's happened to like women who were in the 80s, 90s, the 2000s, and like, where are they now? A lot of that was just how much can I get out of this particular artist in this particular time? And then boop, boop, boop. Yeah. So I really also pride ourselves on like, a lot of our clients have been with us for a long time, whether their record label dropped them or not. We've stuck with trying to really help them grow with their career. So artist development takes a lot of time. Yeah. And as a management team, we're pretty committed to the artists that we work with, which is why we can't sign tons and tons and tons. Yeah. And it's fun. It's a lot of fun. I love it. And my artists who love me back, they love my kids, they come over on my birthday and bring a pair of roller skates. Like they're good people. We're really trying to sort of create like a good, safe, helpful, and very successful, thriving space amongst a wild, not always consistent industry, an interesting industry. And if you can stand, as a friends at work space, you can start to maybe see some other people getting inspired by that, starting their own companies, wanting to do it the same way, wanting to come team up. Artists who are like, yeah, that aligns with what I like. That feels right to me. But it's interesting that a lot of the managers that I heard about or knew about or wanted me to team up with them, you ask around or you hear about things that they've done, and it's like, there was an old model. It's like a manager had to be scary. Like a manager of a music talent had to be someone who could get you what you needed and beat everybody up to get it, and that I just don't think that works anymore. You have to have goodwill and have built good relationships over the long term to be successful now. Because there are some artists that I met and they didn't realize like their manager was that people just so didn't like that manager, that it was hurting their career. Right. But it's also a very small space. So we music is one sliver of what we do. And aside from that, we do storytelling, film, TV, advertising, social impact work, we're really thinking theater. We do, stuff on Broadway. Like we're really thinking way beyond just the traditional, get your artists, put them on the road, blah, blah, blah. Like really a lot of the power lives in that sort of space now with the artists and their fan base. And so it's a great time to build a product and a brand and a company around an artist. John Legend, for the past few decades that I've known him, he's always really taken care of himself. Back when people called that metrosexual, which is just like wild to think about that as a term that was ever used. John was like, maybe we should start a skincare line. And we started with teaming up with different brands that existed. And then finally, we really found this big gap in the marketplace. Like there's almost no research and analysis of like the particular needs of skin that is melanin rich. And it is they have very different needs. So, we built this brand called Loved One over the last few years that is specifically targeted for melanin rich skin. It still is great. I love it. I use it. But it's all about moisture and particular ingredients that will not strip, a darker skin tone of the moisture that it needs and the pH that it needs. And so that's been a real fun project to sort of build something from scratch, think about what hasn't been done before, and then price it so that it's really accessible. So our product Loved One, which again, John Legend thought up, built up, we built it all together with him. That brand just launched, and it's in CVS and Walmart and will be in other places, but it's a really high quality, really good product. And it's not just for someone who can afford a $250 skincare cream regimen. Like this is for everybody and anybody. And John was really clear about wanting it to be for ordinary people, which has really been his brand thread all the way through. And I love that about him. And I'm honored to have been working with him all these years, because it's given me kind of like the high bar standard of what an artist can do. And it's just, it's a lot of fun.
How do you, I think one of the questions I have for you is, from everything you've said today, how do you ground yourself? It's like you have a lot of responsibility, both from just being a CEO and entrepreneur, but also when you start talking about, John's brands or helping artists build brands, it's like that's their name on it, right? And then you also have the mental well-being of both yourself, your team, and then the mental health of your clients. It's like that's a lot of responsibility and a lot to carry. How do you ground yourself and keep yourself kind of, I guess, okay, and your family? It's a lot.
Look, I'll be really honest and vulnerable with you. When I first started the company, I think I wish someone had told me that starting your own company was like an exercise in madness, like that. Yes. I really wish I had had a therapist that year. Like I made so many mistakes. I didn't know how to ask for help, and I didn't know how to admit that it was really hard, and I was so scared. And I think I got into a tough place, and luckily got back into therapy for the first time in a while. Luckily, a really good friend of mine, Erica Rose, and Alicia Keys at the time brought me away on a meditation retreat. And that was kind of the first time I ever really got into being able to meditate. And that it felt so good after 4 days. I was like, oh, I think I should do this every morning. So I started waking up and tuning in and learning how to breathe and learning how to just find 10 to 15 minute practices that would help me tune in with myself a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then I found great coaches and mentors, and some of those coaches we've hired for the company, but I still have a lot of work to do. Like I want to be signing up for the Hoffman process this year. I've heard good things about that. I have a therapist every week that I see. Highly encourage that type of self-reflection. What else do I do? I mean, it's a practice. Like you do have to cry and feel and be a real human being and committed to your own pain and your own trauma discovery and all of it. Because there's not a single human being alive that is great all the time, and And it helps because then like I go through these lessons and these learnings and I'm a better mother for it. I can really understand what my kids are going through. I'm better for that for my artists. So when they're struggling with severe anxiety, I have a large toolkit that I can suggest.
Yeah.
The other thing that I love to do is draw and paint a lot. I do a lot of, while I'm sitting on Zooms, I just use these things.
Awesome.
So is that the Women in Entertainment podcast picture?
I mean, the other side is a big to-do list. But like, okay, there's some funny things on this. Socks and underwear, Super Bowl party, so many things. But this really helps for some reason. I think this is like my subconscious working its way out, and it keeps me, it's just like lots of people have different things, but you got to find a thing. Like if you don't have a thing and you're like white knuckling it through life, try to juggle and balance, it's going to fall apart. Something's going to slip from under you, and your shadow self will become so big that you'll do things that you can't even believe you did. And so I try to encourage everybody to be human, like everyone in my company, like we get on our weekly leadership meeting with my team the start of the week, and it's essentially just all of us checking in on like, oh my God, did the cat poop on your bed too? Like how is your kids, like how's everybody doing? And it's a lot easier for the women, interestingly. Like the women are the ones that like we joke about it. I find that the men struggle a little bit more with the sense of like their emotions and like, are they processing well? And so this matriarchal workplace is something I'm really fascinated with. And I kind of want to like keep diving into that as a place that we should look at and understand more, and not with like the woman who runs the company like the men used to. Because we've heard about women who get to the top of Goldman Sachs, but they're the ball buster, like it's like, what does it mean to reinvent a space for work where we spend most of our time, where it can be integrated into your more full self? And obviously, like there have been some really great writers and teachers in this now, I think, like Brene Brown. I love listening to podcasts with Glennon Doyle and Abby Wambach, like just women who are shifting these perspectives and really trying to get in touch with like, how do we become our best selves so that we can save the planet, do good things, raise the babies well, limit the amount of trauma. And the music space is a really dark space with a lot of trauma.
It's interesting. It's interesting you say that, because I think of Indra Nooyi, who was a CEO of PepsiCo, and she led that company and was, she's heralded for it in terms of how she looked at her job and being the mother, almost like a mother of PepsiCo, right? In terms of how she approached it, because she understood the limitations and the boundaries that everybody has in their lives. And that's how she led versus being, as you're talking about, like the CEO of a Goldman or, looking at some of these companies where they're, you're almost a matriarch fitting into a patriarchal type of system. She created her own system, and that is really inspiring, and how to lead that.
Just trained to not to pretend like they don't have another life. And
Right.
It's a new world to think that we're all moms and we're all working and we can talk about cat poop and the weekend and still get our jobs done. And the men, it's like, oh wait, you have to pretend like you don't have another life in order to get your job done. And that's just old thinking.
I know. I remember when I first started speaking on some panels, like I was on this, maybe it was like a Mary Claire top 50 most powerful, like I couldn't believe that some of these lists were coming my way. I wasn't sure why. And it was so exciting. I would show up at these events and, oh my God, I'm in this now. And now I'm going to speak up on the stage. And I do have this sort of like, this way of sort of maybe sometimes saying a little too much, but I remember, talking about like the motherhood part and the balance and all of those things, which feel so like commonplace now. I think COVID really, really shifted it because we saw men in their homes. They were home. They were like, oh God, this is hard. This is what you do all day. It was like, we really woke up a lot of men through the process of like, you are working from your home. And do you see how hard this is to balance? But when I talked about that, I remember a really big woman in PR who I admired, who I still love, but she said to me, like, you did great, but I really don't think you should not be talking about like the motherhood part and the kids part, because like men don't do that. You don't need to do that. Like, you don't need to be talking, like, there's that perspective where somebody always asks, like, why do they lead with like a woman entrepreneur, or what, like, why don't they just call me an entrepreneur? And I'm always like, I'm not ready to do away with acknowledging that part yet. Like, we're not there, I mean,
the vernacular hasn't caught up to where the world is. And I think about, and it's one of the things that, even thinking about this podcast and what we've talked about is there's a lot of articles, if you look in the past decade, of women saying like, no, why are you asking me this question about motherhood? Like, you wouldn't ask a male that, right? Like, people get on stage and say that, but being a mother and being that role and that matriarch is a huge piece of our femininity.
I want to talk about it. It's one of the most
something that you have to talk about. And
I don't want to try to be a man.
Like,
that's part of
and it's
my truth. I would love to listen to a Scooter Braun interview, who's one of the biggest managers in our business. I've seen some of his, I watched them, and I've never once heard them talk about fatherhood and parenting and the load balance of all that. Never. I don't think, I can't remember. I wish I should text him and be like, hey, you ever talked about fatherhood on or like the balance of it all, or like gotten vulnerable about, your divorce or like any of that stuff? Because why would we not talk about that? I mean, it almost seems like fake and false, like a 1950s version of like, the dad goes to work and the mom's cleaning happily. And I grew up on Free to Be You and Me, Free to Be You and Me, which was like, just no, none of that's real. We should do a new Free to Be You to Me that's like, updated, but that I was always like, who needs to fake this stuff? And also just acknowledge your truth and your humanity and what matters to you, because the more you normalize that, the safer everybody will feel being their full self.
I think I want to work with people who care about other things. Right? Whether it is your philanthropy or your family or more than that, or, your dog or something. I want to work with people that have a full life. I don't want to work with a guy that I'm like, I don't even know if you are a real person when you leave this, but you may hang up in the closet and be a suit.
Well, it's like, I remember, before I started my company, and I worked at this other agency, and I remember I was CC'd on an email that I wasn't supposed to be on about travel. And I literally was told by a partner, oh, Renee can go because she doesn't have a family. And for traveling. And I remember that was kind of like the end of my time. I was like, I wasn't supposed to be on it. It was probably like an auto, like, add Renee because her name's in this email. And I remember getting that and being like, if somebody looked at me honestly and said, listen, I have family stuff to do, are you open to traveling more because I have these responsibilities? And I was single. I was in my late 20s. It's a different conversation. But to have a female partner write that and automatically assume, I just was like, I would 100% understand if you were a mom and you're like, I don't want to leave my kids. And I love travel at the time. But it turned into this very negative stigma and assumption that I was like, if you owned that femininity and you owned the fact that you're a mom, that changes the conversation in a way that's like, I'll have compassion and I have empathy. And, I hope to be in a situation where I can look at somebody one day and say, hey, would you mind taking this trip? Because I can't, because I'm with my kids. Right. But it's just the assumption, or that kind of, and it was very, I don't want to say patriarchal, but it was like, oh, she can go. She's single. She doesn't have anything else going on. That was kind of like, and that just made me not, it's like, and those are the experiences that kind of define how you lead moving forward. They're the situations where you're like, just have an honest conversation, be authentic, own who you are. And that's, and that's something that I admire when women talk about all of the different, elements that, are driving them forward, or how they ground themselves, and, what's important in prioritization, because constantly as women have to redefine success. And even as a man, like, whoever you are, you constantly redefine success in your age and, as your position changes in your life and your perspectives change. And I think that's so important to, have that compassion and empathy for it, because everybody will hit that point. But I do agree with the fact that, you do need to find that grounding and you need to own who you are and be authentic about it.
Yeah, and continue have the conversation, because we have a text chat with a lot of people in my company. Particularly there's like a mom's one. And I think it was just because we were always joking with each other about, a lot of us are like the breadwinners in our families, and so one of my senior leaders, she wrote, "Did you guys see that the Wall Street Journal pool reporter who went to the Ukraine with Biden just got back from maternity leave a month ago? I can't even imagine that being your first business trip after a baby." And then she wrote, "I have to admit that my first thought was that I couldn't believe the Wall Street Journal would send her on such a mission, but it's actually so great that they offered it, or that she did it, or that she got it, however it happened."
Right.
So those are conversations. And then she posted a pic from the reporter, who posted a pic of all of her breast milk that she'd been drinking, and it says, "Didn't manage to grab any souvenirs for Sophia from Kiev, but pretty sure this is all she wants anyway. #working mom."
Oh my God, that's great.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So the more, again, the more that's out in the open,
Yeah.
I love that this reporter wrote that. I think it's just great, because there's so many different ways to do it. Not everybody wants to do it the same. But if you can see options of like, I went to Kiev with Biden and I pumped the whole time, and I got home 3 days later and my daughter was fine,
everybody's good.
Make you think like, maybe we can. I'm not saying we can do it all. Like, there's the laws of physics. There's that Atlantic most popular article that was written about how like we can't, right? Let's just be honest. Like there's limitations with our time. But if we can find a workplace, by the way, it costs more to have that level of load balance.
Mm-hmm.
I have more people on my teams with artists than most manager companies do. More well-paying people and more services and more, because that way we can all pick up our kids, get to bed at normal hours, help each other out, load balance. When Taina can't be there, I can go. When I can't be there, Catherine can go. Like it's always a conversation of like, how do we do this? But it costs more. But who needs a $60 million house? The priorities are shifted, right? Like why, to me, you can take all the money out from everybody and own it all. But why? Like, what's the point if you don't get to see your family, if you're not living a balanced life, if the people who work for you aren't happy, if the families that they're building never see them? Like, that's just more pain and more bad practices. And so it takes a lot to upend the old norms. And I'm really grateful that I don't work in corporate America, big company type thing, but I love that the woman who ran PepsiCo is trying to shift it in those bigger spaces. That's an effort and a half. And, but it also, like, our country doesn't provide, the United States is like one of the only Western countries that doesn't provide, family care and maternity leave paid. My friend Reshma Saljani has been like, just constantly trying to change that and to have this conversation, because we're not fair to working moms in this country. We don't provide
podcast with Reshma.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, she's fantastic.
She's amazing. She's amazing.
Tell her the other women that you started, the other people that you started the company with, were they friends before, or did you guys just know each other? I know we're almost out of time, but I wanted, the structure of the company is so amazing. Were you guys friends before, or how did that?
Adina, who is kind of my head of management, is one of my most senior managers. She was with me like 2 company iterations back. So she joined when I was with this other guy, and then left and joined this other guy, and she came with me every step of the way. So she started with me, and then my friend Catherine, I went to college with her husband. So I had known about her work and where she had been. She was at CAA and Media Link. and, you know, similarly bumping up against these ceilings and really frustrated. Very brilliant woman, one of my favorite people on the planet. And one of her children has special needs. And we're just so lucky to have her work with our artists and be in the company and be a senior voice and a senior executive with us. But, you know, she runs her schedule. She does what she needs to. Her daughter needs her support. Like there's no weird looks about that. Like I remember having to teach some of the young women who were in my company, because there was like this slight little rumbling of like, oh, this one manager, it's like she's not always available. And I was like, well, you know, she's potty training her child. So like if she's not available in the way that you are, that doesn't mean you're better than her. Or like, you know, it's just, we have different lives. And she's more senior because she's been a manager for 10 years and she's in her, you know, she's yes, she has a 2-year-old, but like we need to work together, all ages.
Yeah.
But there was some struggle in that because some of these like very young, ambitious, single people were sort of like, well, why am I not? I'm doing so much work and she's at Target getting diapers. And I'm like, okay, but you don't have 10 years experience in this business. So like, these are tough conversations we have to have to rewrite the rules because everybody's coming in it like, well, why her? Why not me? Why? But you know, that's just human nature.
Yeah. It's also,
but if you're in a business that doesn't really like, we don't work that way. And so if I start to find somebody being that way, I'm like, listen, I love you. And you're great that you're available 24/7 all the time and that you're the fastest to respond to an email. But that does not mean that's what I'm always, that doesn't mean you're like better than everybody or that you deserve a bigger salary, you know?
Well, I think it's the wisdom of age. And I think it's something that, you know, it's interesting to see with this generation that's coming up in the workplace because one, I think COVID, they're learning the discipline of work within offices and you know, the discipline between work and life balance. You know, it's something I'm seeing with my team. And I think the second piece is we don't value the wisdom of age that much anymore, you know, and I think as a society, and I think there's something to be said for that. Like, you know, Catherine, you know, who's had 10 years experience, there's wisdom behind that she knows how to get to where she needs to get to because she's done it A, B, C, D, E way to learn that this is the best route. Right. And everybody goes through that. And I think people, and especially women, have to have patience with themselves and for themselves to learn all of those different routes. And I think that's something that, you know, we don't teach very often, you know, as a society. And I think that it's always the fastest place or what's the next salary or how do I get more money or how do I get to the next promotion? And, you know, and I think that type of mentality has been drilled in to society that it's not always about that. And there is a craftsmanship and it is about, you know, whether it's a craft to, you know, I do PR, you know, and that's my day-to-day beyond women in entertainment, but there's a craft to it, right? Like there's a way to do it and the way to look at it in strategy. It's similar to how you manage and it's client relations and it's service and it's listening and, you know, and that's why your clients stay with you. And it's understanding them and being able to relate to them and have the empathy for them and, you know, and all of the responsibilities you bear in helping them build their brand. That's why, you know, you and John have stayed friends and built that relationship. And that's irreplaceable. And you can't always teach that. It's a matter of observing it and being able to admire that, you know, and gain and garner that wisdom in your own way. And I think that's something that's missing sometimes.
Yeah, and being a safe place where like managers can come and join us with their artists that they've managed, but they need a bigger infrastructure to do it really well now that this is such like a global space. And so I think I've heard from a lot of younger managers that when they need to team up with someone, they're worried that if they go to X, Y, and Z company, that like honestly what happens is the guys will like give great meeting and bring them in, but they'll try to unearth that relationship and then like there's, you know, steal the client essentially. And I've even been set up for that once with like a big client who came my way with a woman who had been sort of like the day in and day out manager for years, but she never got the back end. She never got the real income. It was sort of like my story for a while with John, but that they were trying to get it right. And within a short while, it was so clear to me that everybody wanted to undermine this woman who really was now at the helm and should have been, who I was trying to just be like, it's her client. We are her support system. But even like, even the husband came to me, was like, you should be the manager, not her. You need to step up and do it. And I'm like, why? No, this is who's empowered.
Yeah.
Like, let's empower the other person. It's very interesting human nature to observe when people want to compete and people have like really insecure, ego driven, and that thrives in entertainment and music and all of these spaces. Yeah. So I would say like a majority of our effort is trying to keep that from taking hold in the artists themselves, keep them from going really high on the narcissistic personality disorder spectrum. Like you get the 9s and 10s and they become like sociopaths. They don't care who they hurt, what they do. They're so famous, and that is part of a trauma that exists in the music business. And I've come across it. I've managed it before, and it's subsuming and it's dark, and you don't want to be in that situation. And you don't want to be a company that gets in that situation either. And so again, those practices of like self-awareness, consciousness, coaches, conversations, vulnerability, conflict. Like I was never really good with conflict. And now it's like, I've had to practice it, like really being truthful and having conflict and working through that. And then teaching some of the younger teams, like how to do that without burning bridges, without, and it is nice. The wisdom of the age, I gotta say, I really love it. And I love doing this and having like a purposeful, so that moment on the plane where I was like, I promise I'll do something. I still try to think about that almost every day. Like, what am I waking up and doing that is my fullest, sense of obligation for this day. And sometimes that just means really, really being present for my kids, taking this thing, putting it away and listening for hours, sitting, watching a show, cooking a dinner, hanging out, and not being distracted by this sense of importance that like, oh no, John Legend might text me, it's just like that. Nobody's dying here. This isn't heart surgery. It's music. It's fun. Yeah. So you kind of can't take yourself too seriously within it. Yeah. But with all that, I do need to, I have 2:00 appointment.
I was going to say, you're taking up a lot of your time. Thank you.
I could do this all day. I love this conversation, and thank you guys for having me and asking me. Thank you both. And thank you for even creating this venue, this opportunity for these conversations to happen. It's it reminds me of a lot that I sometimes forget about. So thanks for listening.
Yeah. Oh gosh, thank you for sharing. It was a great conversation. It was so nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you too.
All right, bye Ty. Thank you.
Bye Ty, thanks.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe and leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. To stay up to date with In Her Words, join the conversation by following Women in Entertainment on our social channels and subscribe to our weekly newsletter at womeninentertainment.com.